Hi, my name is Lynn and this is the Darbin Orvar channel. Today I'm going to continue my built-in bookcase series in collaboration with Rockler and make this countertop made out of rough sawn maple. So let's get going. I started out using thick rough sawn maple boards about 4 inches thick, 10 inches wide and 6 feet tall. The first step in preparing the wood is planing to get a straight side to work off from. So here I'm making some marks which will show me where the high spots are. Now I'm using a triple blade planer for this job, and it really does a nice job of getting the wood straight. This wood is full of knots and twists, which makes it very beautiful but also challenging to work with. It was quite bowed and needed a lot of passes to get it somewhat straight. I cut off the ends to get it to slightly more manageable pieces. And then I continue this process many times. After this, I ran it through the planer a couple of times on the ends to get it straight. Right before I ran it through the planer here, I cut the wood in half on the table saw to reduce the size of the pieces, and the wood had so much tension in it. Still, even at this smaller size, the wood is quite big and heavy to work with, so I took my time. Getting the boards relatively flat is really important, so after the planer I moved on to using a hand plane. I need to resaw this wood, and I decided to use the table saw instead of the bandsaw, mainly because the pieces are so big and heavy, and I just felt safer with the additional support of the table saw table. Here you can see the wood cut up. You can see the middle section here, which is where the blade met, and here are all the 4 boards. Everything is a little uneven at this point, but I'll take care of that later. The table saw still had a hard time cutting through this wood. I had to take multiple passes each time I resawed, so it took a long time to cut everything to this point. Now I built a holder for the planer, which basically turns it into a jointer. Here I'm just setting it up with a shop vac. And then I'm drawing some lines just so I can keep track of where the high spots are. The planer is held in place well, and it does a really nice job of flattening out the wood. Of course, the jointers you buy are much longer and provide additional support, which helps to make sure the boards turn out flat. This DIY version with the planer doesn't produce quite as straight a board, however it still does a great job flattening out the wood, so I'll take it, and it makes for a very nice addition to the shop. It's been extremely useful so far. And then of course I ran it a couple of times to remove the high spots. And then looking to see how straight the side is. Now it's a matter of joining them all together. So now these 4 boards are giving me a width of about 17.5 inches in width, which is giving me plenty to work with, and then I can cut it down further to size later on. So I start with arranging how I want the boards, then marking which side is up, and also seeing where the ends need to be jointed further. For this I'm using a hand plane to make all the finishing touches. So planing, checking, planing, and so forth. Once the pieces are all flat, I mark out 5 marks across for where the dowels will go. I'm going to use a doweling jig to help line up the board so everything connects in a straight way. Using a dowel jig makes a huge difference when it comes to lining everything up right, and really takes the annoyance out of working with long boards. And then it's just a matter of drilling like 30 holes in this case to get all the dowels to line up properly. Once all the holes were drilled, I got my glue and my clamps ready. Put down some glue along the joints, put in the dowels, and started clamping everything together. also clamping down some boards at the top to keep the wood from bowing. And then it's a matter of adding more clamps and letting the glue dry. So once all the glue was dried, I started the thorough process of sanding. First, I started out with belt sander to remove a lot of material, and then I moved on to the random orbital sander with a finer grit. This counter required a lot of sanding. First to get all the pieces to the same level, and then to remove any marks and scratches. Now there were a couple of small cracks in the wood, so I decided to fill them with epoxy, mostly to protect the wood over time. Then once this is dry, it's easy enough to sand smooth. Then I cut off the back corners of the counter with a jigsaw after making some measurements to make sure it fits in between the window trim on each side in the office. Now I wanted a smooth round feel on the edges, so I used a roundover bit on the router to create that nice profile. And after additional sanding, I was finally ready to do some finishing. Now I had ordered both the cherry dye and stain, and I had done some tests on this board, which is always a good idea. So here you can see a couple of variations of different strength dye, and then including stain here on top on the darker end. After these tests, I actually decided to simply go with dye because I think that looked really awesome on the maple. What's awesome with both dye and stain is that you can play with the proportions and add more mineral spirits in the case of oil-based stain, or more water to your dye solution to control the color and get something that you like. I ended up using a slightly diluted version of the dye, and I put on 2 coats. It's funny with dye, you might think that it looks a touch blotchy at first as it's drying, but I've found that once you add a top coat, that goes away. Once the dye had dried, I put on a wash coat of polyurethane on both the top and the bottom of the counter to seal everything in. So as you can see, the counter is now finished. Well, it's not quite finished. I have put on a seal coat, but I'm also going to put on several coats of polyurethane to kind of build up a nice finish that will provide good protection. And I just love the way it came out. I really like the way the dye looks and how it kind of added some color without really hiding the grains, and all these interesting pops and variation in the wood is really coming through here. So I'm very happy about that. So I'm really excited about installing it and getting everything ready for the built-in cabinet. Now the next video will be about building the drawers and installing the drawer sliders, and I actually think I'm going to use the box joint jig for some parts of the drawers as well, so that will be really cool. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the description where all the products that I used will be listed, as well as subscribe if this is your first time here, because I put out project videos every week. Otherwise, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.